Good day and welcome to the Hidebound Convivium. Today I am finally getting around to putting out some of the education-themed content that I want this channel to partly be about. As a sort of introduction to what will be a deeper dive into rebuilding a classical Christian understanding of youth education, this brief essay is on the widespread phenomenon of school-age students and their antipathy towards reading. This essay is a bit more rambly and stream of conscience than I would like, but there are a couple of ideas I would like to get out into the ether. As always, I welcome criticism and feedback in the comments. Without further delay, on to the video. Reading in the Age of Sparknotes. Any teacher of any stripe and at nearly any level of instruction will know that assigning your students a book to read is the best way to guarantee that they will not read said book. In fact, in a class of 100 students, it is very probable that 5 of them actually read the material, 70 of them read the Sparknotes, and the remaining 25 were too lazy to even attempt to read the Sparknotes. You are then, as the instructor, expected to make the pupils understand something about this text that next to none of them read. You must, in a sense, accommodate their ignorance first before you can say anything substantive about the text itself, which begs the question, why didn't you just tell them the story up front? Nothing is lost or gained by hearing a text recapped by the instructor over reading it recapped by Sparknotes. Why do we consistently spend energy when it is clear that doing so is a waste of everyone's time? Why not give everyone the Cliff Notes style crash course classics and then call it a day? The fundamental problem with the way we teach reading in the modern world is inseparably bound up in the way we test reading. Educators are fond of saying we do not, quote, educate to the test, but this is a lie. For how can we know that students will be tested on one set of criteria and then teach them another? Instruction is therefore, consciously or not, tailored to assessment. And what does reading assessment look like? Well, in the lower grades, students are taught to memorize details and regurgitate them on standardized tests. In the upper grades, students are taught to memorize sequencing of events and various vocabulary term descriptors like setting, theme, and personification, so on and so forth. In university, if you're lucky to get good English instructors like I had, you get more nuanced questions. But for most people, if your English teacher isn't trying to indoctrinate you into some political pet cause, then they are apathetic enough not to care what questions they put on the exams. The emerging pattern of reading testing is that it is deconstructive, not in the purely Marxian sense, but in the literal sense. Students are raised up with an automatic reflex that any time they see a short reading passage about something as forgettable as Warren G. Harding, or as trite as a story about a little Mexican girl helping her abuela in the kitchen, they immediately start looking for what nuggets of detail they can mine out of the text to then spit back at a slew of multiple choice questions soon to follow. Very soon you have students conditioned into a highly regimented way of thinking tied to the process of reading. Like the Pavlovian dog that knows to salivate at the bell, or like soldiers disassembling their rifles for the upteenth time, students know that when they have a reading assignment put in front of them, they start breaking it apart into its constituent pieces. Those pieces they then insert into a slot machine, which spits out "congrats, here's an A" tokens, and they go about their day. When reading is made to be as tedious as doing back-of-the-envelope calculations with 6 figures in your head, no wonder students don't do it when you're not holding their feet to the fire. But at least in mathematics you have the pleasure of taking your constituent parts and building them into a new sum. It is exactly the opposite with reading comprehension. You are told to mangle the subject until all you can remember is that when the writer compares the flying bird to a man rowing a boat, that is personification. Pretty soon this way of thinking bleeds into everything you read to the point where, as the educational experts have been lamenting for eons, students don't read outside of class either. For the longest time I did not understand these problems. But, as I have been finishing up my education and reflecting back on nearly 2 decades I spent in the public school system, these realizations seem to come to me all at once. There's been a lot of talk on YouTube and elsewhere about the logos. This term was first introduced to me in high school, where it was taught as the logic portion of the Aristotelian triangle. I have come to realize that this is an extremely beneficial association to have rattling around in one's skull. It is easy to attach logos, as the ordering of the universe, to logos as the word, with the Christian understanding that God is the Word and God creates through His Word. Men also create through their words. albeit in a very imperfect manner. The creation of stories and myth is the closest approximation to the creative power of God that man has. Despite being a cliche, it is true that man can weave complicated and interesting universes by his collected words alone. Shaman around the fire did this, Virgil and Homer did this, and the better novelists of our time can construct worlds unto themselves where, owing to the diseases of the modern mind, they can create a heaven of a hell and vice versa. It is these stories, these little universes, which we ask students to read and trample all over in search of which supporting character is a foil to the secondary antagonist. If the story itself is analogous to a created universe, the literary corpus of interpretation and criticism surrounding such a work, which we desire the student to interact with and echo, is likewise analogous to revealed religion. By natural religion, the medicine woman knows that fertility is a blessing, but it is only by, and mark my words carefully, some sort of revelation that such a power is attributed to the fertility goddess. By natural religion, St. Thomas may know there is a God, but by revealed religion he knows that God is a Trinity. While some, quote, revelations may be false, the source material is there for comparison. While there are some secrets which the author has withheld for himself, there are others which are plain to the reader. There is a school of theology that specializes in mining the corpus of revealed religion and picking out disconnected bits of truth that are then cobbled together to form a great chain of errors. But this has never been the manner in which the Church has approached an understanding of creation. The Church, and here I mean the tradition of the Catholic Church, has understood the value of understanding both the universe as created and the universe as revealed by God Himself. Yet when we have students examine these universes in the minds of men, we ask them to remember only small, disconnected elements. We want them to pick it apart, as if one can adequately understand a jungle without knowledge of a tree, and throw meaningless bits of disjointed information back at us chosen at random. Well, they knew that Odysseus is clever and that hospitality is important to the ancient Greeks, an instructor might say. They must understand the Odyssey. The key operative word there is understand, a fine old Anglo-Saxon word that at one point in time meant to stand in the midst of. This is precisely what we do not do, stand in the midst of these stories. Skimming a story for the key parts is not understanding. It's literary tourism. And reading the Sparknotes is like examining a travel review, deciding it's as good as being there, and then not taking the trip. This is all the American system of literary education requires of students, and this is all the effort they will give. Now here comes the most complicated portion of this piece. What is to be done about the situation? I admit I can only offer general solutions. In terms of worldview and approach, we must bring the both-and approach which the Church has towards natural and revealed religion to the examination of literary universes. It is important to understand the criticisms of authors, the literary forms, and so on, but it is equally important to have been there oneself. In other words, to have actual experience of the stories, concepts, and ideas to be understood. On the level of the practical, we could stop treating an education in literature as a science. The fetish which our current educational regime has for scientific measuring and bean counting cannot be understated, and it must be fought everywhere that it is found to be such an obvious hindrance to the acquisition of knowledge. This is underpinned by the importance of the essay over the examination, which requires a related educational infrastructure in grammar, composition, and logic. Ultimately, literary education must transition from a focus on knowing to a focus on experiencing, just as right religion must transition from a knowledge of true religion to a practice thereof. For the Hidebound Convivium, this is Colby Anderson.